I want to get to my guest, though. I am joined with the man himself, Brian Berletic. And just to give you a heads up, Brian Berletic is Bangkok-based geopolitical researcher, writer, and host and creator of the new Atlas on YouTube. Brian, welcome to the show, man. How you doing? You doing all right?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for having me back.
Always, man. You are a fan favorite. I think your analysis has often been spot on. And so, no, I deeply appreciate it. I'm sorry to bring you on as a hard pivot, going from me being an asshole about somebody having cancer. That is never a good look, to what we're talking about now. I guess they're somewhat related, though. And I guess the relation has to do with this notion of the split between Trump and Netanyahu. And it was in the media for almost like weeks. There's a split, there's a rift between Israel and the United States. Oh my God, is the US going to just dump Israel to the side? And there was even talk saying stuff like, what is Donald Trump going to do? Is he now going to focus on these other items? I want to play a clip for you. Marco Rubio said, the quiet part out loud. And mind you, Rubio was only boosting what Trump was saying when Trump was in an interview and said, I just want to nail this down. This notion that there's a split is nonsense.
Happened. Now, if I were,
are you frustrated at all with Prime Minister Netanyahu?
No, look, he's got a tough situation. You have to remember there was an October 7th that everyone forgets. It was
the Joe Biden thing. Always invoke October 7th when you're talking about hundreds of thousands of people being murdered by the Israeli government and when your government is effectively supporting it. The reason I'm showing that is because I use that to point out that for all of this talk about Donald Trump having a split with Netanyahu and that may somehow affect how he deals with Iran, I think it's nonsense. Give me a take on this, though.
You're absolutely right. There is no split. This is all theater. They did this all throughout the Biden administration. That could have been Biden sitting there saying those exact words.
Exactly.
This is what I've been trying to point out to people for years and years. At every presidential election, I tell people it's going to be continuity of agenda. Presidents, Congress, they do not make foreign or domestic policy. Unelected corporate financier interests do. They put all of their plans in publicly available policy papers. You can read Which Path to Persia from the Brookings Institution, 2009. They have a whole chapter. It's literally titled, Leave It to Bibi, which is a nickname for Benjamin Netanyahu, allowing or encouraging an Israeli military strike. And then in that chapter, it says, the United States would encourage and perhaps even assist, and of course do this covertly, the Israelis in conducting the strikes themselves. And we could imagine these are in reference to strikes on Iran, but it could be strikes on Gaza, Lebanon, Yemen. The Israelis in conducting the strikes themselves in the expectation that both international criticism and retaliation would be deflected away from the United States and onto Israel. And Israel would be doing this with full knowledge that they would be assuming all responsibility and all of the retribution for any action that they take. They would go into this deal knowing that this is theater. There is no splits. They did this right ahead of the U.S. pulling back, not out of, but back from their military operations in Yemen. They're still providing all of the intel and the weapons to Israel to continue carrying out these brutal attacks on civilian infrastructure designed specifically to cripple Yemen's economy, just like they're doing to Gaza. So this, anytime you hear about a rift between the U.S. and Israel, it means the U.S. needs to do something horrible that they want plausible deniability for. Yes, you were just showing on the screen the cover of Which Path to Persia, which I've been talking about almost since it was published. And I warned people when everyone was celebrating President Barack Obama and the Iran deal, and they were saying, America's really pivoting. We're leaving that terrible legacy of imperialism behind. We're going to make good with Iran and start a new chapter forward. I warned people. I said, this is literally, there's a whole chapter about making deals with Iran, deliberately sabotaging it, blaming it on Iran, and then using that as a pretext to escalate vis-a-vis Iran. That is literally what they did. President Obama half-heartedly implemented it or really didn't implement it at all. He signed off on it continued undermining Iran, continued undermining and attacking all of Iran's allies in the region. And then President Trump came into office and he unilaterally walked away from it. And now he's trying to push forward almost an identical deal with Iran, because again, this is part of the game. You pretend you want diplomacy. You pretend you have nothing to do with that mad dog in the Middle East, Israel. And then when something horrible happens, you say, we tried, we were pursuing diplomacy. It was Israel who provoked this. It was Iran who provoked this. And they're doing the exact same thing with this conflict in Ukraine. The conflict in Ukraine is a US war on Russia. It was maliciously, deliberately started by the US, and it continues entirely because the US wants it to continue. And they've created all of these excuses, all of these scapegoats to push responsibility away from themselves onto everyone else, and including and especially Russia. You could already see how they're setting the narrative up. Russia doesn't want peace. They're not serious about peace. They don't want to end the bloodbath. So they left us no choice. We have to escalate. We have to pursue sanctions. We have to flood Ukraine with more weapons. We have to do this. We have to do that. So this is what they do. It's one playbook, and they use it over and over and over again.
Yes, I'm glad you make that point. I've spoken to so many people on the issue of Iran, and what they give me is the rational argument. Oh my God, it would be a catastrophe. I mean, the U.S. doesn't even fully know the capabilities of Iran, and the oil market would go through the roof, et cetera, et cetera. And as I point to them, ideologues are not necessarily rational. And to make the point, when you're listening to Iran was very clear from the very beginning. We are not getting rid of enrichment. That's a non-starter. It's not something that we're going to do. And in the very beginning of it, you got a more amenable Trump administration. And then his plan started to escalate. And it went from, 3.6% to, well, we need the Libyan model, meaning the fact that you would even use the term Libyan model after Gaddafi got started with Machete is pretty outstanding, right? But we need the Libyan model. We need all enrichment to go away. And then at the recent Saudi humiliation of the U.S., where he was shaking the hand of a head chopper, a literal head chopper, like meaning the hand that Trump shook was the hand that Jelani was using to chop off heads. Tough guy, good looking. We're getting rid of sanctions. Apparently, Saudi Arabia, Qatar paid off all of the excess debt because now they've gotten what they wanted. The Saudis have put all of the money into overthrowing Syria. It's overthrown. The U.S. was involved in doing so under Obama for billions of dollars a year. It's done. Let's get rid of the sanctions. Let's hope the economy comes back on some level. And let's now get this new jihadist in a good position to move forward in Syria. I guess I'm pointing out that the same thing is happening with the Iran deal. Listen to what Witkoff, the realist of the fact, had to say on ABC News.
Well, the president has been very clear. He wants to solve this conflict diplomatically and with dialogue. And he's given all the signals. He's directly sent letters to the supreme leader. I have been dispatched to deliver that message as well, and I've delivered it. But on the other hand, we have one very, very clear red line, and that is enrichment. We cannot allow even 1% of an enrichment capability. We've delivered a proposal to the Iranians that we think addresses some of this without disrespecting them. And so that's important. We want to.
That red line is nonsense. That red line is nonsense. That red line was always nonsense. But one, we shouldn't even be having a conversation with Iran, right? Like the notion that you're telling a sovereign country what they can and can't do is outrageous. There are other organizations that can be more involved in this as opposed to the U.S. Two, the notion that the U.S. starts off the negotiation with, we will bomb you if you don't accept our deal, and then escalate the terms of the deal over the course of the negotiation where they're all over the place. Okay, so it sounds like you're just looking for a war.
Yeah. It almost seems like they want a war. They just want to appear to be pursuing diplomacy, and they want to blame Iran for the reason this diplomacy doesn't pan out, which is exactly what they say they're going to do in the policy papers over and over again throughout every presidential administration. What I want people to do is just stop, because what I see them doing is that they feel obligated to pick, am I a Democrat, am I Republican, am I pro Trump? Am I pro-Biden? If it was Kamala Harris, she would have been shaking Jelani's hand, or whatever she would be doing because she's a woman, and he probably wouldn't shake her hand. But maybe bowing to him from across the room or something. I don't know. But it's exactly what would have happened if the other guy or girl won the election, because it is continuity of agenda. It is one single agenda. It was always about regime change. Regime change in Syria is not because they just want to take over Syria. It's because they want to isolate Iran. The U.S. just carried out a military campaign, a brutal military campaign, and now they've handed it over to Israel, and they're backing Israel in continuing this military campaign against Yemen, against Ansar Allah, because it's in a bid to further isolate Iran. So they are going to continue putting pressure on Iran, encircling it, containing it, undermining it. And I hear people say, well, they would never go to war with Iran. It would be disaster. What makes you think their goal is to actually fight and win a war against Iran? Look, they invaded Syria. They were waging proxy war against Syria. They couldn't do it through direct military force, so they did it through other means. The goal isn't here. The goal isn't to necessarily defeat Iran or defeat Russia or to defeat China outright. It is to prepare the battlefield, create the conditions in which they can continue encircling, containing, and deterring progress. They do not want multipolarism to continue developing, so they're trying to destroy it faster than it can develop and establish itself. That is the actual goal. So they don't necessarily have to defeat or overthrow the government in Iran. If they could, they would. They would love to. If that's an opportunity, they would definitely do it. But they're very happy with things far short of that. The whole conflict in Ukraine, for example, other policy papers admit there's almost no possibility of defeating Russia in Ukraine. But the goal is to extend Russia. You extend them, you force them to invest in this protracted, large-scale, intense military conflict. That money, those resources are unavailable to, say, support and defend Syria, which is why Syria collapsed, partly the reason why. And it prevents Russia from contributing to the overall global rise of multipolarism. If they were not tied up in Ukraine, they would be spending more time in Africa, helping those countries throw off Western imperialism, develop their own nations, and take control over their own destiny. That's what they would be doing. This is what China would be doing on a much larger scale. They did not have to worry about some sort of conflict with the United States over Taiwan or U.S. maritime blockade, either in Asia Pacific or beyond Asia Pacific. So it forces these countries to divert resources away from moving the world forward, and it allows the U.S. to buy time for its primacy. Yes. What was that?
There was the article overextending Russia and unbalancing women. Overextending and unbalancing Russia. That was the article. I know it was a policy paper you're referring to, but they also had an article on the same thing.
Yeah, because
it's the way it's playing out. In fact, I remember there was an article that came out where Joe Biden was effectively saying, yeah, we have back channel communication with the Russians. We know how far we can go before they flip up, which means, and you can even kind of look at it in the way that we were giving them weapons. Okay, we'll give you this. Okay, they've countered that. Now we'll give you this. Now we'll give you this. Like it was always given this stuff in piecemeal ways. So it was never going to change the context of the battlefield. It was always just to keep Ukraine going longer and longer and longer. And if you think about what the Europeans are doing, and even what Trump is doing, what Trump is saying is, let's freeze it. We're not going to give you really any deals per se. I mean, we may put more weapons in Ukraine. We may build up the military again, but let's just freeze it. It's amazing to me that they think the Russians, after Minsk 1 and 2 or the Istanbul agreements, that they would go for that. And yet they put that out there. It's the weirdest thing in the world to me.
And that is literally the plan. I hear people say all the time, no, that's not President Trump's plan at all. That's the Europeans, that's the Ukrainians talking about that.
Literally Trump's plan. It's Kellogg's plan.
It's literally, yeah. And no, it's not even Kellogg's plan. It was U.S. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth, and I say this every time I come on the show. It's February 12th. The transcript is on the Department of Defense's official website, and he sits there and he's like, we got to freeze the conflict. You got to put European troops on the ground, essentially create a buffer zone, monitor the line of contact. So that's not, if you're monitoring a line of contact, you didn't end the conflict. You froze it. You froze it.
Right.
We have to target Russia's economy. So sanctions, which is exactly what Biden did for 4 years straight. More arms, more ammo, more support for Ukraine militarily, expand America and Europe's military-industrial complex, and create a division of labor to delegate the pursuit of American primacy. Europe, you need to take more responsibility for freezing this conflict in Ukraine and holding Russia at bay, tying them up, basically. So when we go to Iran or we go to China, Russia does not have the resources to aid their allies elsewhere. They are totally tied up in Ukraine. That is the plan, and it's in multiple policy papers spanning many years. I talked about Wes Mitchell, 2024 strategic sequencing revisited, and he literally laid out exactly what, and that was 2024, literally what Secretary Hegseth put in that directive in Brussels earlier this year. So that is the plan. That is the only plan. There is no plan for diplomacy, ending the conflict. Talks, again, are just theater to convince people, and it works. You see so many people still utterly convinced that at least part of the Trump administration, they're starting to admit, at least there's corners of the Trump administration that are intent on war. Kellogg, maybe Rubio, but it is the entire administration. This is good cop, bad cop. This is all theater. It's all about perception management, public perception management and diplomatic perception management.
But even within that context, though, I used to call it American point of view. Like, it's this notion of the good cop is still a nonsense proposal. Like, if they think that the Kellogg plan is a peace plan, they're out of their minds. They're out of their minds. Like, the idea that the Russians is going to accept European or U.S. troops, or European troops, let's say European troops for a division of concerns, European troops on Ukrainian soil is a non-starter. Like, all of these things are non-starters. And yet you would think that if people even had an inkling of the Russian point of view of this, that they would say, okay, well, Russia is never going to accept that. But they don't do that. You're right. They say, well, Kellogg is trying to have a peace plan. Witkoff is trying to have a peace plan. It's that horrible Rubio that is crashing Donald Trump's plans. Oh, if it wasn't for Rubio, that Donald Trump will be able to do a peace plan. They're out of their minds. The only question for me is what in Trump's mind, because I'm super curious about it. I know that's a dark place with all sorts of corners and spiders. But I am very curious about whether or not in his mind it's, well, I want to have peace. And this is the way an American president can have peace. Or is it just nothing there? And whatever somebody dumps into him is what he repeats. I don't know.
That's it.
Yeah, you think it's that one?
It's exactly that. He's a performer. He's a salesman, a dishonest salesman. This was his whole life. He's been a dishonest businessman and a public performer. He performed in professional wrestling skits. Like, I mean, look it up on YouTube. And he had a reality TV show that spans many, many years. And if you watch it, this is literally what he's doing now. It is a performance. They take the policy papers, they give it to his administration, who are all neocon warmongers, facilitators of the deep state, and they tell him, and he repeats it. He doesn't even do a good job repeating it. Again, I always point this out, and this is just one example of many. He thinks the S in BRICS is Spain. He thinks Spain is in BRICS. He doesn't know anything about what's going on. He's just repeating what he's told and not even doing a good job at that. And it's exactly like Biden. It's just a different style, different excuses, different branding, different target markets. So MAGA is targeting a different target market of the American population and the global population. And it's meant to appeal to different types of people and get them on board for a little while, and then be so offensive to people who don't support it that they will take the extreme opposite, which is also a market position the U.S. has cornered. So that, the lefty liberal and the conservative right, the U.S. controls both of these spaces. So it doesn't matter which camp you go into, and what part of the tent you're holding up the whole tent of America, the continued pursuit of American primacy. And I always tell people, go back to first principles. What is the United States for real? It is not a republic with an elected president who serves the interests of the American people. It is a Washington that serves the interests of unelected corporate financier interests. They are the ones driving the policy. What they want is what the US pursues. And it's just a matter of selling that to the American people, convincing them that Wall Street, their agenda is somehow America's agenda. When he went into the Middle East, what was he doing? Why was he in the Middle East? Why isn't he working on the cost of living, the cost of education, the cost of healthcare, crumbling infrastructure back in the United States? These are everyday concerns of Americans, regardless of political affiliation. He's not working on that. He's working on, people will say, oh, DEI and the border issue. And he solved it. He didn't solve any of these things. The right-wing media is simply not talking about it anymore. You think there's no more illegal immigrants walking around in the United States? And did he even talk about, let alone address the root cause of that, which is US foreign policy destroying Latin America, forcing these people to leave their homes. People don't leave their homes unless there is a real big problem that necessitates them to leave. So you can see how this is a process of controlling people, managing perception, but ultimately continuity of agenda driven by these unelected interests. Their goal is global primacy. They are corporate financier monopolies. They do not want competition. I always bring up the New York Times article from all the way back in 1992. That was US foreign policy at the end of the Cold War. The title of the article was US Strategy Plan Calls for Ensuring No Rivals Develop. That was the strategy and objective then, and that's what it is to this day. That is what the US is still pursuing. If you go to Project 2025, which is the playbook Trump is verbatim pulling policy out of, that was published in 2023. And under the section, the chapter about the Department of Defense, it's talking about American military primacy over the entire planet, controlling Asia so that China isn't the most powerful nation in Asia. The US wants to prevent China, which is located in Asia and is the largest, most powerful country, from being the most powerful country in Asia. So that is the problem. And until people face that and realize that none of these people in Washington, regardless of party or the promises they make, none of these people serve the American people's best interests or America as a nation state's best interests.
Yeah, I do think Joe Biden was a true believer, though. Meaning Joe Biden had geopolitical aims. He believed in American primacy, which is why I strongly suspect nobody had to convince him for that nonsense war in Ukraine, or nobody had to convince him to allow Israel to do what it is doing. Whereas Trump, yeah, I agree with you. I think they're just dumping stuff in his head. He's just repeating whatever he's told. I mean, as you point out, he does it poorly. J.D. Vance does a much better job articulating Trump than Trump does.
I think just barely. I don't know why. I guess because Trump is such an empty vessel, people are beginning to gravitate to J.D. Vance, but it's only relative to Trump. He's not some. Right. And he'll end up being the next candidate or something. We'll have to suffer 4 to 8 years of that.
Yeah, oh God, man, you're so right. Like, MAGA went into this. God, man, it's such a bait and switch. MAGA goes into this thing. Oh my God, Trump is going to stop these wars. He's going to get the Nobel Peace Prize. He is going to have no tax on tips. He's not going to go after Medicare or Medicaid, Social Security. He's doing all of those things, meaning no tax on tips is not in the Republican bill. They're gutting Medicaid to the tune of like $1 trillion. He is not just walked away from the war in the way that Steve Bannon said, walk the F away. Well, he's not doing that. He's effectively doing another Joe Biden at this point. All down the line, all of those things have been broken promises. As you point out, the border stuff has been performative. Him deporting somebody for criticizing Israel, A, is so anti-American, it is hard to kind of even countenance that. But B, MAGA is like, yeah, get that foreigner out of the country. Missing the fact that foreigner is a brain that may immigrate to the US to better your country. But instead, in their minds, that foreigner is criticizing America, get him out. Look at Donald Trump doing great on the border. It's bizarre. It's super bizarre. And by the way, you see the same thing for Joe Biden. The Democrats, liberals, are for the war. And so if Donald Trump keeps it going, they would applaud it for keeping it going. Oh, look at Donald Trump keeping that war going. That is great. That is fantastic that Donald Trump is keeping it going. They may complain about him not doing, well, he's only given, $50 billion. He didn't give, $100 billion. They may do that. But all
Yes.
things being equal, they're for it. They're lockstep in line with this notion of geopolitical expansion. Both sides on the same page. It's very wild. You're absolutely right. American primacy around the globe, multipolarity, and he does this thing of saying the opposite of what he's actually doing. If that makes sense. Like,
Well,
oh, I'm helping the Gazans by ethnically cleansing them out of Gaza. Oh, I believe in peace in Ukraine by ignoring the fact that we lost the war in Ukraine. Like, this stuff is nonsense, but it's exactly what takes place in regards to the way he sells it. You're right. He's a salesman. He's just up there to sell it.
and people are so polarized. And what I noticed President Trump doing, and people who support him, the way they react to it, he will say one of everything. So he's for and against it at the same time. One day he's for it, the next day he's against it. And in people's minds, because they went out so far on a limb to support him, and they're like, well, at least it's not Kamala Harris. In their brain, they're only going to latch on to what they want to hear, and they will ignore everything else he said, contrary to what they want him to say and what they think he stands for.
Right.
And that's what I see people doing. So out of one side of his mouth, he's like, oh, I've got a big problem with Benjamin Netanyahu. I got a big problem with what Israel's doing. And then the next day he's like, I got no problem with Benjamin Netanyahu. And these are all, obviously, like, if you take all of the rhetoric, you filter it out, and you just look at the cold hard facts. Israel cannot conduct military operations without constant and complete support from the United States. So if President Trump had a real problem with Israel, he would cut that. He's not cutting it because he doesn't have a problem. And everything else is theater. People really need to start cutting through the rhetoric. Follow the money, follow the arms, the weapons, and read the policy papers. They have signed and dated plans of everything that they're doing and how and why they're doing it. There's no mystery here. You just got to take time. I know it's boring. The papers are long. You can do it. People can do it, and they need to do it, because otherwise you're allowing, whether you want to blame Trump or not, he's complicit one way or another. Whether you want to focus on him or not, this whole system, the deep state that people voted him into office to fight against, it will continue, and you're allowing it to kick the can down the road by getting distracted with all of this rhetoric and not cutting through it and seeing the continuity of agenda, exposing it, speaking up against it, and finding ways to stop it.
Yeah, it's fascinating to me. It doesn't seem to matter. Like, as I tell people, when I was looking at the whole Iran-US negotiations, that there's a context that didn't seem to matter with political party, whether it was Obama, whether it was Bush, whether it was Joe Biden. You had Syria, Libya, Afghanistan, Iraq, all of the men taken down. And whether it was Libya under Obama, whether it was Syria under Obama, because let's be honest, it was Obama that was effectively paying billions of dollars in order to try to overthrow the Syrian government. He just couldn't do it in that time frame. And what did they do? They froze the conflict. And what did people think in their minds? The conflict is over. Well, the conflict wasn't over, it was frozen. When Trump comes in, what does he do? He protects Idlib, which is where Jelani was effectively setting up his fiefdom. And
Yes.
all of a sudden, it explodes. Oh my God, the conflict apparently is not over with. And at the most inopportune time for the Syrian government is overthrown. Then after the fact, after the crime has been committed, you get Trump coming in, shaking Jelani's hand. He's a good-looking guy. He's tough pass. Yeah, the tough pass and chop people's head off, but okay, let's, yada, yada past that. Sanctions removed. Now we can get back to normal with our guy in charge. Meaning this idea of Trump being a peace candidate is nonsense. Donald Trump was every bit as instrumental as overthrowing the Syrian government as anybody else, whether it was Obama or anybody else. And keep in mind, the sanctions for Syria go all the way back to George Bush first. Like, meaning it was George Bush, first George Bush administration. I'm sorry, George Bush Jr. was instrumental in saying, all right, we need to go after Iran, so we need to go after Syria in order to go after Iran. There's a continuity of purpose. And I think that's your point, that regardless of the president, there's a continuity in regards, at the very least, foreign policy. I would argue domestic policy also, that is a thread running through all of these presidents. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. What do you think is going to happen with the talks? I mean, I agree with you. I think these things are theater. I think Donald Trump is going to try to push Putin, thinking his charm, or whatever charm he believes he has, is going to somehow make the difference between what Russia considers to be foreign policy. I mean, the notion that Trump is acting like he's a mediator when he is a party to the war is pretty outrageous. What do you think is going to happen in these talks?
It is America's war. It is America's war, solely America's war, and they are fighting it through both Ukraine and Europe. I hear a lot of people say Europe wants the U.S. to stay in Europe. For what? There is no national security threat facing Europe. Nobody's trying to invade or take over Europe. Russia and Europe were working together closer and closer, and even Europe and China were working together closer and closer until the U.S. maliciously, deliberately, violently overthrew the government of Ukraine in 2014, and then assumed control over both the political government, the military, and the intelligence agencies. They have full control over it. And it is now an extension of US foreign policy. This is not a war being fought by and for Ukraine. It is a war being fought through Ukraine. This is an extension of America. They just don't want to fight the war directly with Russia because they're both nuclear armed superpowers. Right. And so that they're trying to avoid that. So it is a proxy war. And there's even people in the Trump administration that have admitted it's a proxy war, but then they still, again, like we were saying, they say that 1 minute, and then the next minute they're saying, oh, those Europeans are trying to undermine our talks, and Zelensky's being so difficult. You overthrew the government in Syria, and you're shaking hands with the literal head of Al Qaeda in Syria, but you can't get Zelensky out of office. You can't do that. I think you could do that, and it's just like with Israel. Nothing Ukraine does can be done without complete and constant support from the U.S. first and foremost, and they're transferring all of this onto Europe. And Europe is doing this at Europe's own expense. There's no benefit at all whatsoever for Europe in doing this. They have already suffered throughout this conflict, first being cut off from cheap Russian hydrocarbons, deindustrializing their economies, and all the destabilization that has taken place because of the conflict in Ukraine, the flood of refugees, millions of people fleeing the country, emptying out their arsenals, sending all of that to Ukraine, creating unprecedented tension, needless tension with Russia, which never and still to this day does not have any ambitions to invade Europe. And they know that. That's why they're happy to empty out their arsenals. They have nothing in their arsenals because they know Russia's not going to storm into Germany, or, I mean, do people imagine they're going to come onto the shores of the UK or something? It's ridiculous. And so the talks cannot go anywhere. It's up to Russia. Russia has to make a decision. Do we allow the U.S. to corner us into this ceasefire? The U.S. is going to use to freeze it, just like they did Syria, for the exact part. No intention at all. 0% interest in any sort of diplomatic conclusion to this conflict. They're trying to freeze it or slow it down so that they could keep it going for as long as possible and bleed Russia to the fullest extent possible. So Russia either has to agree to some kind of ceasefire and hope that they can make better use of the time than the collective West can, which is what they did during Minsk 1 and 2. Mm-hmm. I don't think they really thought that was going to end in any sort of diplomatic settlement. I don't think that they did. I think they have to say that because of how bad it looks. But I think they cynically said, we're not ready. They don't want to admit that they were so weak they were not ready then. They needed time to get ready. Mm-hmm. And then the special military operation was, it's either now or never. So they either agree to this because they think they can make better use of the time than the West does, or they're going to continue pushing on the battlefield. And then it's going to be up to the U.S. for the mask to fully drop off and put maximum pressure on Russia. And you will see a coordinated campaign across European, American, Western media in general to make it appear as if Russia was the one disinterested in peace. President Trump did everything he could. It was the Russians or someone else, but it's not going to be America that decided to continue with their own war that they themselves started and could at any time of their choosing end.
Agreed. Yeah, that's what they're doing now. I mean, if you look at the media, it's like Putin didn't show up to the negotiations with Zelensky. Okay, well, Putin never said he was. And then under normal circumstances, that's not what really happens. Zelensky is the one who came out and was like, well, I'm showing up at the negotiations. I am curious about why Europe goes through with this. I mean, for all intents and purposes, as you point out, they're damaging themselves. They're being deindustrialized. You have money to the tune of hundreds of billions of dollars that are fleeing out of Europe into the US, either in weapons or, for that matter, in LNG, where we're charging like 5 times more than they would typically pay. What is the thought that, okay, once we overthrow Russia, we get our hands on those resources which would compensate us? I don't see that happening. So what is the end goal? What is the end game for Europe in this? It doesn't seem like it's to their betterment in any sense of the word.
Well, to answer that question, we have to ask ourselves, why is Ukraine doing this? Because Ukraine is being destroyed almost brick by brick as part of this proxy war. Why? How did that happen? The U.S. politically captured Ukraine. The U.S. has also politically captured Europe. They have controlled Europe for decades. The European Union is a bureaucratic layer that was like a wet blanket thrown over the sovereignty of all of these individual countries, and you can see, this tension between each of these countries' interests within each of these European countries versus the European Union. The European Union is asking these countries to again, just like Ukraine, fall onto your sword for what? For all of these rhetorical reasons, but ultimately it's for American primacy. The division of labor that Secretary Hegseth was just repeating like a parrot from all of these policy papers published by corporate-funded think tanks. The whole purpose is to get Europe to do what Wall Street wants them to do for Wall Street at Europe's expense. That is the whole purpose of having a proxy. Europe is not an American ally. They're not partners. They are proxies just like Ukraine. Ukraine is the most expendable. But if the US has to sit there and decide, it's either we throw Europe into this next or deeper into it because it's already into it, or do we give up American primacy over the planet? Do we just accept that? And the answer is we're going to put Europe deeper into this. And the European Union will be instrumental. And it's going to be up to the weakened sovereign institutions in each one of these European countries to try to fight back against this. But they're unable to because they've been cut off from Russia. They are being cut off from China. And so they're isolated and they're at the mercy of the US and the corporate interests that constitute US power.
Yeah, I think I've said this myself, that the US looks at Europe as a proxy every bit as much as it looks at Ukraine as a proxy.
Yes.
And it would feed Europe into the wood chipper every bit as much as it's feeding Ukraine into the wood chipper. And Europe doesn't seem to know that, or at the very least, they don't act like they know that. They think, I get the sense, look, I think you're right, but I also get the sense that Europe believes that we're in it together. Like, it's like the Western world, the 14% of the global, whatever, we're in it together, which is why Europe lumps in with the superpower. Missing the fact that that's not the way we look at it. And I remember I've had conversations with Europeans. I was like, you realize we don't look at it that way, right? Like, meaning I live here. We don't look at you as equals. I mean, J.D. Vance made it clear when he was like, we don't care what Europe thinks. Like, they're just saying it quite out loud. We don't care what you think. This is what we're going to do. But they don't think that. At least I don't think they think that. Not from the Europeans that I've spoken to. They think somehow we're in this together. And that's not the way it works. I mean, the oil and gas thing was a really good example. When Europe was cut off from Russian gas, the US was like, hey, good. We can now charge you 5 times more because you need this product. And you can't do without this product. Great. We didn't look at it like we're in it together, so we're going to share the burden. That's not the way we think about this. Do you think they know that? And maybe I'm wrong on this. Do you think they know that we're not in this together?
I think you're onto something. Part of politically capturing a country is putting in people with a very specific psychological profile. These are people that do not have impressive human qualities. If you look at anybody in the European Union as part of that bureaucracy, who's going to argue against me on that? Nobody can do that. So you look at these people who know nothing about how the real world works. They are career politicians, they've been in law and politics their whole life. They have no connection to the real world, industry, work, infrastructure, military matters. They have no idea what's going on. And they pick people who are incapable of getting to a position like that on their own. So from their point of view, they are like parasites latched on to the United States. They know that this is the best ride they're going to get. They're not going to be able to achieve this station in life any other way. And so they're willing to do anything. And I see that here in Asia. The US constantly politically interferes here in Asia. They have political parties that are funded by the US, and the political leaders of these parties and the people heading these organizations are not just profoundly ignorant and naive, but they're also egomaniacs. They have starving egos that they couldn't feed on their own. The US sees that and exploits that. And this is what empire has done all throughout history. They find the weakest link. They find the fault lines in a society. They expand them. They divide people, and they find the weakest people and put them into positions of power because you can easily manipulate them. You don't want to put someone who's strong and competent and has a mind of their own, because they're going to realize, why are we throwing Europe into this proxy war with Russia, who used to sell us cheap energy, which allowed us to compete internationally in terms of industry? Why would we do that? You have to find people dumb enough to be okay with that and go along with it constantly. Dumb enough or selfish and short-sighted enough, because you look at some of these proxies the U.S. creates and the very unfortunate ends that sometimes they meet.
Mm-hmm.
How come they didn't see that coming? How come they couldn't understand they were being used and that they're expendable? How come they didn't understand that? Like South Vietnam, for example. It's just they pick people specifically that cannot see that, because anybody else wouldn't go along with it.
Taiwan, another good example. Philippines, another good example. It's like, you're really picking a fight with China? Is that really what you're doing right now? And you really believe that the US is going to come to your aid and have a nuclear war to defend Taiwan? Is that the thought? Like, meaning, I don't get, like, after seeing Ukraine, you would think that the world would say, hey, that's an example for the ages. Let's not do that. That's not what they do, though. You still have these countries willing to, shoot themselves in the kidneys or in the heart or whatever, and still go down that pathway. From your take on this, though, okay, the talks are going to go nowhere. Trump's is probably going to increase sanctions. For the Iran thing, that also is not going to go anywhere. Iran is going to stand their ground. They're going to tell the U.S. to F off. The U.S. is probably going to turn a blind eye to Israel having some kind of attack, because Israel has already said we were attacked at the time and place of our choosing. And the U.S. is like, well, we tried to negotiate. We did everything we could. And, Israel just kind of did its own thing. Does anybody believe for a moment that the U.S. is going to say anything to Israel if it attacks Iran? I don't think anybody, at least not on this channel, does. The European elections for the moment. Simon. Fair election, unfair election.
It's irrelevant.
Because I think this makes your point.
It's irrelevant. I think it's irrelevant. So many people become fixated on these elections, and you have to just look at the history. Just look from 2013, 2014 to today. So this is over 10 years. What difference has any election made in Europe? I mean, even people like Viktor Orban in Hungary. What difference has it made? When the pressure is on, he signs off on everything that they tell him to do. So what difference did it make that he was in office?
Or he abstains?
Well, I mean, and then you have to ask yourself: is this just a way of managing people in Europe who are starting to wake up? Obviously, they have a plan for that, because they're doing it in the United States. The reason you have Democrats and Republicans, and they pretend to be diametrically opposed, but they are completely in cooperation with one another. The Obama administration built the stairs for Trump to go up, and then he built some stairs for Biden to go up. And that's how it works. Why wouldn't it work like that in the European Union, which the US has politically captured and transformed into an extension of itself?
See, for some reason, I feel Europe is slightly different. Like the people are slightly different. Like I tell you, when I was in France, there was the farmers brought cows into the middle of the highway in order to stop the traffic as a protest for what the government was doing. Or the Yellow Vest movement, for example, being out there for 2 years, some insane amount of time. If you couldn't sustain a protest like that in the United States for 2 days or 3 days, let alone, well, okay, Black Lives Matter, fair enough. But those were economic matters, not these kind of racial fault lines that were in the United States that really only serve the Democratic Party in the way that they were effectively leveraged. I guess I'm saying, do you see Europe as being, the public in Europe as being different? I mean, look at the AfD, for example. Well, okay, the AfD was radioactive 10 years ago. The AfD is like the number 2 party in Germany. Marie Le Pen's party, National Rally, again, radioactive. I mean, fuck's sake, that goes back to Vichy, France. Number 1 party in France. And if they had a fair election, she would most likely win it. Of course, she was taken out by, let's say, legal issues that prevented her, just so happened to prevent her from running for 7 years. But I hope you get my point, though. Even in Romania, I mean, look at the extravagant measures that they had to effectively take. That stuff kind of takes the mask off. Like, that's not, we are taking subversive action in order to do X. That is, we are literally canceling an election because this guy is going to win this election, and we don't want this guy to win the election because he wants to prevent a military base from being on the Black Sea. Okay, that's pretty astonishing. And if you're a population of Romania and seeing that, how do you look away from the fact that for the first time, they literally canceled an election in the second round when it looked like the guy was going to win it? I guess I'm saying they seem to be taking far more aggressive, overt action in Europe in a way that is unhideable. How do you hide that? How do you do that in a subversive way? And I would have to think that they're doing it for a reason. Is it because the population in Europe is far more inclined to flip out when things like this take place, whereas the US is more anesthetized? People have their Xbox, they have their girlfriend, boyfriend, they have their jobs that they're stuck with, that they can't deviate from. Is it different in Europe?
Well, I do see there are differences, and I would say people are more inclined to protest there in Europe. But at the end of the day, you have to ask yourself, people come out and they protest. And then what? What if the government just ignores you? And what if they just keep rigging the elections? Then what do you do? And then you have to ask yourself, if you're going to have a big movement or some kind of revolution, you need to have circles of interest with money, power, the ability to actually do things, to do the physical things to change the country one way or another, peacefully or not peacefully.
Yeah.
Where are those interests? Who are those interests? Where are they going to get their money, their organization, their resources? When you look at, say, in Ukraine, the U.S. was behind the armed mobs that overthrew the central government. The government itself, it was an entire country with its institutions and its resources, but it was incapable of standing up to this U.S.-backed power. Russia was obviously trying to back the other side, and the separatists, the rebels in eastern Ukraine, obviously. And so without some large collection of interests, these protests aren't going to go anywhere. It's just a reality. You have to think. It's not like in a movie where everyone just comes out all at the same time. Like, you need organization, you need resources, you need money, you need infrastructure, you need logistics, you need to gather all of these things together. Who's going to do that? That's my question. Who is going to be the one that does that? Who's backing it? Yeah. I could see businesses, industry in Europe that is being destroyed, being behind something like that. but what capacity and what level of organization and how much time and attention have they put into that? And I don't know. I don't know the answer to that question. We just have to wait and see. But I would not hold my breath and wait for elections or just ordinary street protests to change anything, because Western governments know the ins and outs of protests and movements, and they're very skilled at dividing people, polarizing them, distracting them, and diverting their energy in harmless directions away from their core interests. They've done it over and over again, and I have not seen really any exception to change my mind on that. And I would keep an open mind to it, but I just think it's unlikely at this.
But see, they weren't able to overthrow the Georgian government, and they tried. And I guess Georgia saw the Ukrainian example, was like, we're not allowing that to take place here. I mean, but they were more prepared. I mean, they were willing to break ankles in order to keep that protest and that mob from trying to overthrow the government at that point. But that's a rare exception. No, that's rare.
I say, and I don't know who else was helping them or how long they prepared to do that. So I would say it's not beyond the realm of possibility. But in Georgia, they didn't just all come out at the same time. There were circles of interest, political parties, businesses, industries that invested. I've seen it here in Thailand. There was a U.S.-backed color revolution, and then there was a counter color revolution organized by interests in Thailand. It was a lot of ordinary people joined it, but it wasn't like ordinary people organized it. They were part of it, and they contributed. But it was you have to have these big interests on board. So you have to identify them, and then you have to see if they're up to anything. Then you can tell maybe what direction an election or a protest might go in this country or that country.
Brian Berletic. Brian, man, we have a fantastic crowd here. You are awesome, man. And you've been doing this for a while. You've been calling it. And like you said, read the policy papers. They spell it all out. Thank you for this. Brian Berletic. He is a Bangkok-based geopolitical researcher, writer, and host and creator of the new Atlas on YouTube. Check him out. This is just a taste of Brian. He puts his shows out consistently. Thank you for this, man. You be safe, okay?
Thank you. Take care.
You too. All right. Brian is